Listen-only mode.
Well, hello and welcome to today's HIPAA Chat. I'm Carol Fly with High Tech Answers. Thanks so much for joining us on our monthly series dealing with everything HIPAA. Today we're going to be talking about securing your endpoint devices, BYOD, and a few other things. Of course, HIPAA Chat is sponsored by eFax Corporate, a brand of J2 Cloud Services. They've been our sponsor for a full year now. We thank them for their continued support. Without eFax Corporate, we would not be able to bring you HIPAA Chat, so thank you very much. HIPAA Chat is now on LinkedIn. We have several groups on LinkedIn, and we started HIPAA Chat. You can join the group at the link provided, or go on LinkedIn and search HIPAA Chat and you'll find it. We actually post articles about HIPAA and discussions, and it's a new group, but it's engaged. You can also catch HIPAA Chat on our High Tech Answers internet radio station, healthcarenowradio.com. If you go to that website, you'll not only see when we're going to broadcast the show, but also podcasts of previous events. And I don't have it listed here, but you can also, if you'd like to catch all of our HIPAA chats this last year or so, you can go on YouTube, search High Tech Answers, you'll pull up our channel and you'll see all of the videos as well. Of course, our host for HIPAA Chat is Steve Spearman. He's founder and chief security consultant for Health Security Solutions. He's been in the healthcare industry for a couple decades, I guess, 25 years. And
Yeah, too
25
long.
years, too
No,
long.
no, I'm not that old, Carol.
No,
Yeah,
you're,
I mean, it's not possible. The math doesn't work out. I mean, I'm only 29, so
well, he obviously Steve was a savant and started HIPAA
yeah, that's
when
right.
he
I
was
started,
5 years
yeah,
old.
absolutely.
Right. Be sure to be sure be sure to check out his free video conferences at healthsecuritysolutions.teachable.com. He does answer anybody's emails, so
Yeah.
please contact him at sspearman@healthsecuritysolutions.com. I've met Steve Spearman in person. This is what he looks like. So.
Hey, Carol, not to inject controversy right in the beginning of this today's show, but my Clemson Tigers are #1 in the nation. I'm just saying. Okay? Just saying. #1.
Clemson Tigers.
Clemson
Woo-hoo.
Tigers, #1 football team in the country.
Okay, well, I not to interject before we introduce Michael, but Roberta and I placed a bet in Las Vegas in October. It was like 35-1 on the Carolina Panthers to win their conference division because nobody believed they could win a single game. And other than the Patriots, they're still undefeated.
They're undefeated. Oh
Roberta
yeah,
and I are going, oh
absolutely.
my gosh.
Well, listen, I'm rooting for you for that one because that means you have to buy me dinner at Hims this year if you win that one.
If we win that, we'll buy you and Michael dinner. So Michael, I know you're in California, but you now got to be a Carolina Panthers fan.
Yeah, I'm definitely rooting for him.
Yeah.
Michael Flavin is with us today. He's a senior product marketing manager at J2 Cloud Services, which is a part, of course, over eFax Corporate. Great to have somebody who is involved and part of our sponsor, and we're glad to have him here. He's an expert in this area of encryption and will be helping us shepherd questions on the topic. You can contact him at michael.flavin@j2.com. He also wrote a recent guest article for High Tech Answers that we published on Monday and included an infographic. The article is Don't Become a Data Horror Story, 10 BYOD best practices for healthcare. It's a great infographic. If you go to High Tech Answers, it's still on the homepage, but if not, you can certainly search for it and it will pull up. It's a very, very helpful article, and we hope to see more of his writing style on our various sites. Also, please join Michael, Steve, and yours truly on December 10th. We're actually doing a webinar called Protecting ePHI Transmissions in Healthcare. Are You Secure? On the December 10th event, we're going to be discussing some common misconceptions about security and transmission of ePHI, some compliance pitfalls, what you can do going into the new year 2016 and more. You can learn more at this little bit.ly URL, which is bit.ly/1QYA1LR, or you can click the link below. You can also find it listed on our Health IT Answers website under webinars. And so we're very excited about that. Please check that out. Okay, guys. Are you guys?
So, Michael, let me say, thank you for sponsoring HIPAA Chat for the last year. Seriously.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm getting
emotional.
Talk amongst yourselves. Talk amongst yourselves. No, seriously, thank you. It's been fun.
Great.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much, Carol and Steve, for that intro. And you guys are great partners, and it's really great to listen in to these HIPAA chats. It's really always very informational and topical. So hopefully everyone has been enjoying it.
Oh yeah, yeah. We've created some momentum here. It's awesome. And for those of you who are new to HIPAA Chat, if this is your first occasion, real briefly, we take questions when you register, and we're going to be addressing those questions first, or some of them first anyway, and then we'll also take questions during the event. So if you have a question, go ahead and use the question box on the right side of the dashboard to pose your question, and we'll go ahead and see if we can't get that answered. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to email Steve and Michael. I've put both their email addresses right on the screen. And it's a free-flowing conversation, but really the bulk of this is to address questions from the audience. And so if you guys are ready, I say we dive right in.
I'm ready. And I want to just add too that Carol and I review all the, if you put a question in the question box and we don't get it to it, I actually go through all of them, and and we'll often actually reach out to people and say, hey, here, we didn't get to that. Do you want to talk about it? So anyway, yeah. So let's bring in those questions. Keep them rolling. Right. See if you can stump the host.
Stump the host. We've done that before. Yeah. We've done that only a couple of times in the last year. So let's see what we can do. First and foremost, okay. Let's help debunk the encryption is required myth for HIPAA. It's stated as addressable, but I feel people think it's required. It's a great question.
Yeah. So first of all, totally agree with the sentiment of the question. The encryption requirement is often presented as, the encryption implementation specifications, there are two of them in the rules, are often presented as required, and they are in fact addressable. So, and I'd love to hear what Michael has to say, but let me kind of do my little spiel about this. So first of all, addressable safeguards, and actually everybody keep an eye on the High Tech Answers inbox in the next week or two, because I'm actually writing a Q&A right now on addressable safeguards and how you think about them, how you apply them. But let me tell you about what is not the right way to think about addressable safeguards. So yes, they're not required, they're not in that category, but the right way to think about them, the wrong way to think about them is that they're optional, because that is not the right way to think. This is how to think about it. An addressable safeguard is required if it's reasonable and appropriate. So under the rules, any organization has to go about and to determine whether an addressable safeguard is reasonable and appropriate. If they determine that it is, then you need to implement it. In other words, under those conditions, it is required. If you determine that it's not reasonable and appropriate, you have three options. Those options include going ahead and implementing the specification, or implementing the specification, or implementing an alternative, or not implementing it, but you need to document your decision. So, let me give a real life example. So I was just recently talking with a client of mine who was thinking through the question of encrypting their databases. So they process a lot of protected health information for their clients, and the question was about, like, how do we think about the data that exists on the servers and it's the requirement for encryption. And they had run their applications through what's so often in technical terms called a sandbox, where you test the result of that. And the results were that it dramatically increased what's called latency. In other words, the amount of time it takes for the screen to paint on your screen when they encrypted those databases. And these are physical servers that are in a tier 4 data center. In other words, we don't worry at all about physical security. So in that case, I advised the client that it was reasonable for them to just document. It was reasonable for them to conclude that it wasn't reasonable and appropriate for them to encrypt, and that they just needed to document the results of that decision. Excuse me. I'm losing my voice already because I talk too much all around. So yeah, and so I mean that's really the right way. Now there are circumstances where if I'm advising a client, for example, where they have laptops as an example that contain protected health information, and especially if those laptops are being carried off site and physical security is an issue, I'm going to tell a client that they have to encrypt it. The risks are too great. And even though it's an addressable safeguard, it's reasonable and appropriate always in those circumstances. So anyway, talk too much, Mike. Why don't you say something, because I'm losing my voice already.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're not coughing in anticipation of Clemson playing a ranked team.
Yeah.
I mean, so, no, but thanks. I think you nailed it. I think, yeah, sure, it's an addressable issue, but really encryption should be a best practice, implemented as a best practice. Like you said, for organizations, an endpoint is an endpoint, and lost or stolen data is a big issue. So do you want to be that organization that says, well, based after a security arrest analysis, we didn't think that data breach would be an issue if someone accidentally sent something EPHI to the wrong domain with a list of 2,000 patients' information. If it's encrypted and it doesn't have a key, it's a useless blob. Would be my sense add to that.
Yeah. And actually, under the rules, it's not only is it addressable, not under the rules, it's addressable, but HIPAA under the breach notification rules, if data is encrypted, then you're given a pass. It's called the safe harbor provision, and
exactly.
That's another reason. And actually, let's kind of bring it full circle to what you were saying, Michael. Our topic today is endpoints.
Right.
And under the discussion of endpoints, if you have PHI on those devices, you need to encrypt them. I mean, it's like, now there are types of endpoints, virtual, if you have virtual devices, complete zero client, thin client devices, then then it's different because you've used an alternative to disk encryption in those cases. But in most cases, when we talk about laptops that are mobile, that have PHI, you got to encrypt those devices. I mean, you're dumb not to. And if you were to present in your example, Michael, if you were I can see you in front of an administrative law judge, having to defend the decision to not encrypt, even though you have thousands of records on these laptops that are going all over the place. And they say, well, we determined it wasn't reasonable and appropriate, and you're not going to get anywhere with that argument. You really aren't. It's like that. It's not just consistent with best practice, consistent with the fact that up until a year and a half ago, 80 to 90% of all breaches were related to the theft or loss of a device. And if those devices had been encrypted, they wouldn't be on that wall of shame today. So.
Exactly.
So have we buried that one yet, or I bet you encryption's going to come up again, but let's just see.
Yeah. It does, but I'll save it. Can you guys talk about one of the registers wanted, cell phones and texting? Obviously, physicians text all the time, and it's a big issue.
Yeah.
Michael, you want to start there?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, a huge percentage of breaches are from lost or stolen devices, just what you said, Steve, earlier. So I think it's a common sense approach. If it's PHI encrypted, whether or text, it's email or text or whatever it is, ePHI is not going to discriminate. And lots of physicians and people taking care of patients love to be able to text and use applications for efficiency, and it makes sense, but it has to be done in a smart manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so when one of the steps you take for risk analysis is inventory, IT asset inventory, and thinking through the question of first of all, a lot of times those kinds of devices aren't included in an inventory, which they need to be, and then you need to ask yourself, is there PHI on these devices, or is it possible that PHI is being sent on these devices? And yeah, one of my challenges to when I do work for like clinics, I'm often working with like the office administrator, and I'll say, do you know how your physicians are using texting? And a lot of times their answer is, I don't know. And I said, well, we need to know. I mean, doctors really, really like texting. I'm a big fan of texting, but they need to seek out solutions that allow them to do that in a secure manner. And I think this more broadly gets to the issue of mobile device management, being able to in some cases organizations should deploy a solution like AirWatch or does J2 do anything in this space, Michael?
We do. We have a product called Keep It Safe. They have mobile device products and services along these lines, definitely.
Yeah. So there's solutions that allow you to kind of standardize what's called a profile for different types of mobile devices and make sure that the password settings are appropriate and geo-tracking is enabled and remote wipe and things like that. And those can often are an important type of control that organizations should consider. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the case of human error and some of the things I'm sure we'll talk more about, the remote wipe and some of them, the robust tools that are out there allows segmentation of employee versus company data, the tracking you've talked about, so that if a device hasn't checked in for such amount of time, there's business rules that can be put in place. So there's really good tools out there. It's just they've got to be used and people have to be trained on them.
Yep.
All right. Could you talk about vulnerable operating systems or about network segmentation? Obviously, that must have come from somebody in IT.
Yeah, so in a way that second half is maybe a little bit of stump the host, in that I'd have to understand a little bit more about what they're talking about. Presumably, you're broadly talking about separating sensitive data from non-sensitive data, and that data can, quote, be segmented in any of a number of ways. But let's go to the operating system, which I think is an interesting question. Two approaches to it is, well, first of all, there are currently two widely used operating systems that have been sunsetted by Microsoft, which means there's no security patches being released for them. Those two operating systems are Windows XP and Windows Server 2003. For XP, it's been about a year and a half since those were sunsetted, and then Windows Server 2003 was sunsetted this past summer. And that means that Microsoft is not releasing any new security patches for those, which means that over time those devices will become increasingly vulnerable to attack because they're not being patched. So now it is important to note that the regulations themselves do not specifically address operating systems and sunsetting of those, but it would be critical that any organization document the risks associated with sunsetted operating systems in their risk analysis. So, and that you should have a plan to replace or upgrade those classes of devices if you've not done that yet. There was a lot of people saying when in April 2014 when XP was sunsetted, they said if you're not upgraded the next day, then you're, quote, out of compliance. And that's actually not true. What would be true is that it's a risk, it's a known risk, so that needs to be documented. And it's not unfair to say that you should, that you need to have a plan to mitigate that risk. And I'll be honest, at this point, a year and a half down the line, if you still have Windows XP machines, I just want to say you may have a problem. This could be a symptom of a deeper problem. I don't know, but it's like Windows XP is like really old now. It's not been so let's make a plan to, as soon as possible, to get rid of all your Windows XP machines. And really, you need to be thinking the same way about 2003.
Well, I would think too. The Windows, I mean, if most of the people on the who attend HIPAA Chat are generally in the meaningful use program and using certified EHR technology. So my guess is, they've got a different operating system than that, I would think. So
yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised, Carol.
I hope so. Yeah.
I still run into a lot of Windows XP machines.
Really?
And I think people are just, their plan, it's not really a plan, it's kind of non-plan, but their plan is to wait till they die, and then they will replace them.
Right.
So,
and keep adding RAM, so it keeps working.
Adding RAM, right.
Yeah, which is the equivalent of like Velcro and
duct tape.
Duct tape, yeah. It's like keep this thing creaking along. So seriously, people need. I'd say it's really, really important. People go ahead and have a plan to replace XP machines as soon as possible.
Yeah. Sooner than
the other thing I would just add to the operating system question is keeping them patched. It's just that it's not just. I mean, you need to keep your machines patched. And that includes Windows patches. You need to have a method for making sure those are up to date, and also also keeping other applications like your Java. I hate Java. For a lot of security people do, but you probably need it because a lot of applications use it, especially web applications. But Java, Adobe, which is not just Adobe Acrobat, Adobe Flash, Adobe Air, there's these things, and so you really need a method to keep those up to date as well.
So one of the attendees chatted, what about operating systems on medical devices?
That is a really interesting question.
That is interesting. Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, the reason it's interesting is the answer is often outside of the control of, for example, the IT staff of a hospital. So one of the problems, and it's a pretty intractable problem, and in fact, I don't know if you knew, but I'm actually going to be speaking at HIMSS this year about this issue. Yeah.
Congratulations. I mean, it's a good thing, Yeah.
Did you tee that up for me, Carol? You did. You teed that up for me, didn't you?
Everybody thinks I have some sort of inside line to HIMSS, but I don't. I wish I did.
Yeah, no. So it's a good question, and honestly, a lot of times, you're kind of at the mercy of the vendor providing the device, and just the main thing I'd say is if the vendor says they can't update it because of FDA, just know that that's a lie. That the FDA has published multiple documents, contradicting that statement that's often made by vendors that they can't, update those that firmware and other things. They can. They just have to make it a priority. So.
Well, since we're talking about operating systems, I might as well take this next question. Apple's iOS encrypts data saved in apps. Is that encryption sufficient, or does the app vendor need to also encrypt the data?
This is a really good question, and that I just, by good fortune, recently researched. And I will tell you that my research, I've not solidified it quite as much in my head as I'd like to. But it does appear, okay, so first of all, iOS, if you've got either of the last two versions of iOS, then it encrypts everything as long as it has a passcode. So if you put in a passcode, and by the way, if you've got any kind of iOS devices that's used in a medical or healthcare environment, those devices need to have a passcode. What goes without saying, kind of what we were talking about mobile device management and all that earlier. So if they have a passcode, then the data is encrypted. But the interesting piece here is, what about third-party vendors? And so this is my not quite up to the 99% surety I'd like, but I think I can say with 85% confidence at this point that it does appear. I actually went into the technical documents of Apple just a few weeks ago. It does appear that third-party apps are encrypted.
Wow.
That it's sort of baked into the SDK, the software developer kits for the most recent versions, and that appears to be the answer. But I'd like to, and in fact, if anyone out there knows about this or knows anyone who knows about this, I'd love to actually have to dig into this a little bit deeper. But it appears, 85% confident that it appears that all the data is encrypted.
That'd be a great article post, by the way.
Yeah, that would be, and I'd like to. Again, my confidence level is not high enough yet to warrant. I've got to dig a little deeper into it. But it's a really, really interesting question that people should be. People are probably thinking, Steve, you think that's interesting? That tells me why you're so boring. It's like nobody thinks that's an interesting question except you, because you're boring. So anyway, I think it's an interesting question.
The Clemson Tigers aside, yeah.
That's
right. Is a password sufficient on laptop, mobile phone, iPad, etc. to secure my personal devices?
Read that one more time. Is a
password sufficient? Password
to
sufficient.
secure. Okay.
Yeah, laptop, mobile, iPhone, iPad to secure personal devices.
So when they say personal devices, that it injects a little bit of uncertainty. I mean, is this a personal device that's not being used in a healthcare environment? Blah blah blah. But let's take it just. So
it could be from the BYOD perspective.
Yeah, exactly. It could be a personal device that's used in the healthcare environment, and that raises some interesting questions. But so first of all, the answer, I think, Mike, tell me if you agree. Michael, tell me if you agree.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a personal device that has corporate PHI on it, my opinion is, especially a mobile device, my answer is no. I mean, like we've already said, addressable issue aside, it really needs to be encrypted. At least the data needs to be encrypted. File and folder encryption at a minimum.
I would totally agree, because first of all, whatever entity you're working with, whether it's a small practice or hospital, there should be some level of inventory and a policy and procedures on these are the devices that are allowed, these are the applications that are allowed, and if you use them, this is how they're going to be done. So I would think, especially in light of the breaches this year, what is there, 113 million records that have been breached, they would check in with the IT management team and say, hey, I'm going to use this, how do we do that? And they would help deploy that. But it goes back to the mobile device management that you talked about, Steve. You're talking about anti-malware. There's a big increase in that. And maybe they implement this through virtualization. So maybe it's just a window into the EMR or the back-end stuff where it's a portal through to this, and the data is not on the device. That might be a little bit different. I don't know what you think about that.
No, and actually I totally agree. I mean, one method that I think many organizations should consider to secure their protected health information for remote devices of any kind, or is actually hey, okay, why can't you have a person that has their own, they have their device, and maybe it's their device, but they can only access that sensitive data through a virtual environment. Literally the only way to do that, and you know, that can be as you say, that can be something that I like to see in a policy procedure, because you still, you know, there's some risk in the sense that somebody could presumably take that, you know, a spreadsheet that they're reading off of that virtual machine and then save it locally, but it's still you know, a lot better than just running a, you know, fat client application, for example, on a device. So yeah, again, there might be alternatives such as virtualization, but I mean, if you got a device that is that has instance of information, and especially if it's mobile or remote, you know, you need to assume that you need to encrypt it unless you're using something like virtualization as an alternative. So there's another twist on this. On that question though, I'd like to tackle, and that is, I just want to tell you that I am a big fan of alternatives to passwords only as the access control and authentication method. We technical, boring technical people call it credentials, and so I'd love to see more people using multi-factor authentication when they're doing that. So, and you know, I'm going to give a really good piece of advice for everybody related to their own computers at home. Any kind of sensitive account, so this is your online banking portals, this is your Gmails, any kind of email thing, that you need, they should have support some sort of, you know, two-factor authentication. And in fact, if you're using a service that doesn't, then get a new service. So you know, I'd like to see more. I'm just saying that it's actually really amazing how well these systems work, and you know, like in my bank, if you know, if I try to log on to a computer that bank doesn't recognize, it sends me a text with the code. And that I have to put that information in, and it comes to me. It's like just a little extra step, maybe another 30 seconds of work, and this adds a lot of value from a encryption, from a security standpoint. And but to get it back to the whole healthcare environment, you are seeing kind of an uptick in the adoption of two-factor authentication, especially if it's combined with something called single sign-on. So you know, you can use some sort of authentication like a badge or even biometrics, and that not only gets them into the computer, it'll actually authenticate or give credentials into the various applications that they're using. And then if you combine that with a virtual environment, it even adds all kinds of advantages that are real interesting, that since I'm boring people now, I'll stop talking about.
Now, I think that's a really good example, though, because the financial industry, the financial institutions have implemented that, an out-of-band password that goes to your mobile device or somewhere else, and it's incrementally a lot harder to, you know, backdoor someone's account, whereas if they didn't have that in place, someone could just, you know, reset your password and try and work through that.
Absolutely, yeah. Compromise, it's not hard. If you passwords, there are lots of ways to crack and get around passwords, and it's possible to actually hack even a second factor. It's just exceedingly difficult to do. I mean, you're a pro at this point, you know, if you do that. It's like, so yeah, and actually Google has an authentication tool called Google Authenticator, and Gmail, of course, being Google, but Gmail uses Google Authentication, but so do a lot of other applications. I love Google Authenticator because it works even if you have no cell phone coverage. You know, it'll you know, it's the way that it's set up to work is super slick. So, you know, not everybody uses it. My bank doesn't use Google Authenticator. It uses that text method, which is fine. but I'm a big fan of Google Authenticator. So.
I'm going to just had some of the attendees sort of ask follow-up questions to a couple topics we were talking about before we jumped on this one, which is going back to the Windows issue. Does Windows update suffice for being patched? And if not, how do we keep our software patched?
So yeah, Windows Update is a really good idea. Let me now, as always, there's never quite simple. Windows is a really good idea, and depending on your environment, like if you were, let's imagine that this question is coming from a 20-physician orthopedic practice with 6 locations and 400 employees. In that setting, the answer is different than it is if you're 2 docs with 15 employees. And the reason is that it has to do with resources and things like that. Let me very, very quickly say that the reason you just don't say, okay, we're going to always everywhere turn on Windows Update and that's going to be how we're going to keep things patched, is sometimes an update can break your software.
Yep.
That's the unfortunate truth. And so in a larger environment where you have the resources to do it, it's actually one of 2 things. Either if you can run updates in what's called a sandbox environment that I mentioned earlier and make sure it doesn't break it, that's one thing you could do. Another thing you could do is a lot of the better vendors actually approve updates before you send them. And that could apply even to a small practice. In an ideal environment, your vendor says, yeah, hey, we've approved this security update, go ahead and run it. But absent that, then in larger settings, I really like to see if you can test them first, so it doesn't break everybody's, software and hinder operations. In a smaller environment, it tends to be just go ahead and activate Windows Update. In a larger environment, there's a tool called WSUS, which is a Microsoft window. It's it's a console for centrally managing updates, and that makes a lot of sense for larger environments. So good question, and the simple, straightforward answer is, yeah, Windows updates are a good idea. How you manage those updates is something that needs to be considered.
Okay, all right. Michael, you'd mentioned earlier the number of breaches this year, and it's been a banner year, but in a bad way.
Yeah. Well, that number is a big number, but Anthem got us like about 85% there. Was it 85 million records? It's an astonishingly large breach.
Yeah, it's in that range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of the registrants asked a question, is this a real problem or an invention of those selling solutions? And so I thought, well, just thinking about the number of breaches alone, Anthem aside.
I'm not sure, Carol,
yeah.
but I think you could use this in the dictionary. That sentence is actually used in an example of cynic. If you look it up, I'm just like, there's a cynic there, right, in that question. And since I'm a cynic as well, I'm not going to completely dismiss. I think the answer is kind of both, but I'm going to mostly side with no. It's not an invented problem, because, well, Michael said it, 145 million records, and with all kinds of ramifications and costs associated with that. So it is something that is a real issue. It is something that the regulations require you to care about, right? No matter, the fact of the matter, in an environment where regulations exist, there are going to be vendors that are going to, through hook or crook or through, good, straightforward, honest marketing and sales efforts, are going to want to help you comply. One thing I've appreciated about J2 in terms of their material and their approach to the market is that it's very, high trust, trusted advisor kind of, wanting to give people good information. It seems like kind of one of the ethos. But there are vendors out there that overstate the problem. They misrepresent the regulations. Like, for example, a vendor that might say, "Oh, you've got encrypt anywhere and always," and we've already proved that that's a more complicated question. So, that's where I would say educate yourself as much as you can. Beware of bold claims that are not backed up by good data. But take the issue seriously because it is real. It is real.
Yeah, I think that you nailed it, Steve. And just the fact that we've already stated that the just horrific statistics, the cost per breach, I was reading an article from Ponemon Institute, it's like $383 per record. So you do the numbers and the math, and from an economic perspective itself, it's a real problem. The question becomes, after a risk assessment, like Steve comes out and takes a look at things with your organization, how important is protecting that information, and what risk is it to your patients and your customers' data, and what measures are you going to take to protect it?
Yeah, and your reputation.
And your reputation.
Your reputation.
And your reputation. I mean, the credit monitoring. Unfortunately, my family was on the list of one of those entities, and it's been a mess. I mean, we've had to call them to even get the credit monitoring turned on. The call centers, the wait times. It was a horrible experience, and if I had a choice, I'd probably might do something different, but it's hard. I mean, it's a real big, kind of a blemish on that institution's reputation.
That was a mess. I mean, yeah, that was a mess. So just your thoughts basically on keeping EPHI from being copied to external media.
Oh wow.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's okay. So, let me kind of put it out and sort of do an illustration or an example. Like, so it's really talking about, like, imagine you're, working in the billing office of a hospital, and let's say that you're a bad person and you want to, do a bunch of Medicare fraud and bill Medicare for people that have, that died, for example. By the way, I'm not making that example up, as you can, I'm not that clever. That really has happened more than once. So you want to be able to know, hey, this person's, downloaded all of these records onto a spreadsheet. How can you sort of know about it and prevent it? So there are tools available that they go under different names, but a lot of times you'll hear the term data loss prevention. And data loss prevention, which is a tool that'll say, hey, somebody downloaded a bunch of records and we want to know why. So that can play a part in that. There are tools that are endpoint security tools. I know that Sophos is one that does that they'll lock down things like thumb drives. In fact, you can set them up so that they will automatically encrypt a device. Like you put in the thumb drive and it encrypts it. And so the only place you can actually use that thumb drive is on the domain where the data was originally captured. So if that person goes home and they try to download it, they can't get into the volume on the thumb drive. So
yeah, I've
there
seen the
are
same experience
to help that, and many organizations should consider those types of solutions. I think, Michael, one of the things you mentioned was photo, like before we were talking about before we started the call, photographs or whatever, and that's that one's tough. Not sure really how to think about that one.
Yeah, I mean, applications that can take screenshots or a mobile device. I'm not sure about that either. But back in the managed service provider days, we had consultants going out to DoD sites, and they had locked down any removable media, thumb drive, with using tools that you alluded to, Steve. Also, along the lines of segmentation, that previous question, I think this kind of fits in there a little bit, in that if you look back at some of the previous hacks that have been done that are public, like the Target hack. The credentials for the HVAC vendor were used to exploit crossing over to the point of sale system. Why would the heating, ventilation, air conditioning vendor ever need access to the point of sale system? So I think that's an example of, it's not just locking down the endpoints, but who has access to what. The roles-based administration, I'm sure, Steve has seen that kind of stuff where it's like, why do they have access to this?
Yeah, that's actually it's a really, really good point. Is that you get into issues of like how you're administrating data across your network and within your domain, and developing appropriate security roles and access levels. I mean, one potentially simple way to address this is like, I like to see the I like to see when you're managing a domain, I like to see the lowest. I prefer end users did not have I prefer they were not local administrators. And you would be surprised how often software will require it, which annoys me. It's not so much on the hospital information system side, but on the physician, like clinic, ambulatory side, how you'll find that, and it does annoy me, because it's like, come on, people, I want to restrict a person's ability to load .exe files and things like that. So,
someone just shouted in, how about the need to scan any device attached, such as a memory stick? Of course, memory sticks and flash drives.
Oh, for like exploitable stuff, Steve?
Yeah, I think that's what the person is alluding to. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I mean, and a good endpoint security suite will automatically invoke a scan of that kind of media. And again, those are solutions that I think are super valuable. And in fact, shouldn't necessarily just look for vulnerabilities and, for example, malware, but should even look for types of files, you should, .exe files are a good example. I mean, you should just not allow them on your network, period, ever,
Right. Sort of a big picture question from the audience. What is the most misunderstood aspect of securing endpoint devices industry-wide, and how do you increase understanding?
If we had a different category or topic today, I probably could answer this more easily, because I mean, I think there's probably not, misunderstood may not be the right way to say it, but I think, though, that people don't understand that they need to care about this. They need to. I'm not saying that everybody everywhere has to have these highly technical people, because that's not realistic for everybody. But it's like, and this is why you do risk analysis. And if you don't know how to do risk analysis, you should learn how to do it, or hire somebody that does. And they can help you understand this. But it's important. And again, I think that the failure to understand and the issues that are presented by that failure are more prevalent in the ambulatory side than it is in the hospital side. And applying a good, rigorous approach to understanding those kinds of issues is super valuable. And so.
Yep. I would just add to that, Steve, that from experience, and again working with managed service provider world, that people is one of those areas in terms of making mistakes or not understanding how to securely use things, in a compliant manner. and that could be training and policies and procedures. And hey, if you get an email that says, hey, here's an announcement from ADP, your account has been changed, click here and enter blah, blah, blah. And that's how many times has that been in the news this year? So that would be my one ad is, like Kevin Mitnick said, the former hacker turned FBI consultant, it's easier to trick people into giving their credentials than, hacking a system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other one is just how many times, and you pointed out to it, some of these outdated OSs that aren't supported anymore are still out there, so that, when holistically looking at a network, an organization doesn't know what's patched and what's not, what has the latest updates and what's not. So managing that in a manner so that it's known and updated continually.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and actually, circle around to that your point about training is just so important. I mean, we my firm, we do pen testing, and pen testing we always do some level of social engineering, and we've honestly never failed to have somebody click on a bad link, because we're not actually hacking, and we're just recording that they clicked on the link, but it's it's hacking the human is, I think Kevin's right. I mean, it's an area where maybe it's better answer than mine, honestly, Michael, because, we tend to think about technical solutions, and I'm not, saying they're not valuable, but a lot of it is like, let's equip people to know and as best we can, and make sure that we're training and documenting that we're training and all that. And so yeah, it's a really, really good point.
Yeah, in fact, for the audience, there's an article, we were chatting about this before the call today on health info security, that talked about a couple universities where PHI was exposed, all employee accident. One case, it was just unfortunately, PHI list of patients was sent over the wire unencrypted, and in the second case, unfortunately, the employee mistyped, transposed the letters of the domain of another university they were sending it to, and sent it to the wrong one, and it was a couple thousand records. So again, it's just being careful and being aware that that could have been encrypted, or there could have been tools in place like autofill to prevent that from happening. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, I will say one problem with autofill is if that problem has ever happened ever in the past again, autofill won't necessarily fix that. But what does fix it is encryption. Absolutely. Encryption, basically, it's going to recognize that the email is not valid. It's going to recognize that email is not valid, and it won't allow it to decrypt the message. So it's another reason. It can be another way that somebody can to sort of another layer. They talk about how security should be layered, and it's another way they can achieve that. So.
One of our listeners chatted in, is there a way for an email server to check for embedded links and route to some sort of a hazard folder?
Yes, there is. Michael, do you want to, I know an answer, but I want to see what you're going to say.
There is. I'm not going to say names, but those tools are there, and it's another way that data can be managed going in and out of the network and flagged so that someone can look at it. Either it can be auto encrypted, or someone could just say this information should never leave outside the firewall.
Right. So there are a lot of tools that'll do it. It'll look for what's in a message. It'll look for records. It'll look for records that contain certain types of data like PHI, and it'll treat those differently. There are tools that will take any kind of hyperlink and basically turn off the link, turn off the hyper part of it. And then there are tools that will look for, hey, this domain is close to the one you thought it sent to, but it's actually somebody that bought the domain that's got one letter off, but it's not a valid. It's not a valid sender. I mean, a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there are tools that will do that. again, based on size, those are worth looking at. And I mean, yeah, so they're good ways to address that. If anybody, for any of these, this whole conversation, we don't try to get too much into the vendor side, except to say that J2 is the awesomest vendor ever. But but other than
we'll
that,
take it.
like we can say that we're happy to provide additional guidance. But the issue is that it varies so much based on your environment, like if large versus small, or the types of tools you're using, or is your EHR a client server application, or is it a web-based application? A lot of factors go into kind of how to think about those things.
Right,
So.
right. Yeah. How do you handle securing Apple devices? Getting back to Apple.
We sort of address that mobile device management, and make sure that you use passwords. That you require a password, and even the other things that you want to include, like remote wipe, geo-tracking. Geo-tracking is controversial. I'll put it out there for obvious reasons, like being able to know where the device is like knowing where the person is, and like there's even a lawsuit in California from a woman who was okay with her employer tracking her during the day, but suing because they kept the tracking going at all times. And anyway, but it's a very useful feature from a security standpoint. I'm not going to tell people how they should implement it, given what I just said, but all those things, and again, a mobile device management solution is a great way to manage making sure those features are enabled.
All right. Well, we've got literally just 3 or 4 minutes left. I've got a few more questions coming in, but I'm going to leave those to offline. If we didn't get to your question, and we didn't get to several of them, give Steve an email at spearman@healthsecuritysolutions.com, or Michael Flavin at michael.flavin@j2.com. Before we head out, I just want to remind folks that we're continuing this conversation, all our conversations on HIPAA Chat, on our HIPAA Chat group on LinkedIn. You can go to LinkedIn, and if you search under groups under HIPAA Chat, you will find that group. And then a reminder to please check us out on December 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, on protecting EPHI transmissions in healthcare. Are you secure? You can learn.
Yes, I'm going to be on that show, so you have to come, everybody.
Yeah, you do. It's a
take it personal if you don't come.
It's a HITECH Answers ePACS corporate event, and you can go to our healthitanswers.com website, .net website rather, and look under events and webinars, and you'll find it. And obviously, as always, I'll get a copy of the YouTube video of today's presentation out to everybody who registered. We got 2 minutes left. Any final thoughts on the topic before we wrap this up?
Just for everyone who is interested in more info, check out the infographic that Carol alluded to earlier. It's got some great best practices for your organization to consider, and it's called Solving the BYOD Dilemma in Healthcare that she talked about earlier.
It was posted on HITECH Answers on Monday, so you should see it. Find it pretty quick.
Hey, Carol, can I make a shameless plug here?
Of course you can.
It's like, well, I'm just gonna. I'll even sort of say, everybody, many of you need to, you're trying to get to meaningful use. The rules have been published. Just remind everybody, you have to do your risk analysis by the end of the year. And if anybody needs help or wants advice or whatever, that's kind of mostly what we do.
Mostly what Steve does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd love to help you. So give us a buzz.
And even if you've already done that, you always recommend an SRA, meaningful use aside, right? I mean, you still have to do one even if you're not in the program, right?
I mean, even if you're not meaningful use, yeah. I mean, it's a HIPAA requirement.
HIPAA requirement, right?
So yeah.
Yep. So, all right, great. Well, listen, you guys have a great Thanksgiving holiday, and we are dark in December for HIPAA Chat, but we will be back at it in January.
I'm
Thanks.
sad, but we'll be. But I'm guest. I'm a guest though on Michael's program.
Yeah,
So
exactly, exactly. So we
yeah,
have the crossover show again.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hope you all
It's
have a
going to be
great.
fun.
It'll be a blast. I hope you all have a great weekend and a great Thanksgiving holiday. We'll see you in the new year.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.